have needed wisdom, it is now. It is now that we need wisdom more than any other time. Let's go back. There's one. As I said the last time I was speaking here, is that Paul, instead of launching, he says this, he says in 1 Corinthians 1:21, it says, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God. All right, so at that point, I would expect, and possibly you, if you'd given it any thought, I would expect that at that point, Paul would launch into a condemnation of all of the world's wisdom. Right? Is that he says, the world did not know God, and here is the reason why. Okay? But surprisingly, he does not do that. He does not do that. He gives us he gave me some whiplash when I started focusing in on this, is that instead of talking about corruption in government, greed, sex sins, all the things that we would consider to be worldly, and saying, that's not going to get you to God, he doesn't do that at all. He goes in a different direction, and he goes on from that phrase there to say, for the Jews, it says, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God. For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. I get curious. Do you ever get curious? Like, what is that all about? The thing that I just want to say right now about that is that both kinds of wisdom there, or both methods that these two people groups use to get along and live and prosper and be who they are, they both have one thing in common. They have an outward appearance of being very spiritual. They have an outward appearance of being very spiritual. But God has already pointed something out about what he considers spiritual as opposed to what the world considers spiritual. 1 Samuel 13:14, the Lord has sought him a man not after his own appearance, not after his mighty right arm, not after bam, boom, or incredibly penetrating insight. But he says that I am looking for men and women who have my heart. Who have my heart. Not my actions and not my intellect and not these other things of God, but that what he is after is those that have a heart like his. Those that have a heart like his. Okay? And then it goes on to say in 1 Samuel 16:17, in the same context, man looks on the outward appearance. And this is the thing about all world wisdom, is that it all focuses in to build up and enhance outward appearance. Somehow thinking that enhancing outward appearance is going to bring about some kind of knowledge of God. Okay? But that is the seduction that pulls on us, this outward appearance thing. But then it goes on to say, but the Lord looks on the heart. Outward appearance is at the root of all wisdom produced by this world. It's outward appearance that's important. Inward heart is not important to the world. It's exactly the opposite of God's priorities. Just want to show you something here very quickly that I was reminded of when I was meditating on this, is that in Numbers 21, 8 and 9, and in Kings 18:4, there's an interesting story here. And what it is that there was a plague that broke out in Israel in recorded in Numbers. And the Lord told Moses to build a brass, of all things, a brass serpent. And when they would look at this thing, they would be healed from the plague. Okay? Fast forward for approximately 800 years. Fast forward approximately 800 years to 2 Kings 18:4. And here we have a guy named Hezekiah, King Hezekiah. He finally takes this brass serpent who the people had been offering incense to. According to what we understand, who is the only one you offer incense to? The Lord. The Lord is the only one you offer incense to. And in other places it talks about it being a symbol of not only worship and not only the costliness of being in God's presence, but also it talks about it being prayer. So it was a symbol for prayer, and prayer is a confession of I need, and you're the only one that can supply that. And they're doing this to a brass serpent. This is not the Hittites. This is not the Philistines that are doing this. It's God's people that are doing this. Hezekiah, this took a lot of guts for him to do this, because there was a mentality that said, if God used this brass serpent in the past, surely we can rely on it to bring us salvation, healing, prosperity, all those things in the present. And Hezekiah, he rose up and he broke it in pieces. Whoa. Okay, there was people that were not happy about that. And he, interestingly enough, named that serpent something. It didn't have this name before, but he named that serpent, and it was the word Nehushtan. And guess what it means? You can find all kinds of stuff if you'll just dig a little bit. It means it's only a piece of brass. It's only a piece of brass, you guys. Did God use it at one time? Yes, absolutely. But now it's only a piece of brass. Don't be looking to it for the provision today. Never allow our past experiences of God to be the standard by which we develop our expectations of our current experience with God. Now, I know that's a mouthful. I'm going to say it again. Never allow our past experiences with God. Were they God? Yes. Yes. Oh, my yes. But if we take them and we say, yeah, okay, you got the point. You got the point. Experience God to be the standard by which we develop our expectations of our current experience of God. This is what they did with Jesus. They said he doesn't look like our previous experiences of God. We reject him. It's like manna. You can't live on yesterday's manna. You have to have the current provision. All right, so that's enough on there because, see, the last time we talked about the history of the Jews and why their expectation was that way. But now let's get to the Greeks. Here we have in 1 Corinthians 1:22, it says this, it's still part of the same verse. Greeks seek after wisdom. Remember, the Jews demanded signs. We talked about that. The Greeks seek after wisdom. The word seek after means to plot, to obtain, and then interestingly enough, it means to pray and to worship. David talks about, I would seek unto God. And what he was saying is that he was going to pray and he was going to worship. So when it's talking about the Greeks seek after wisdom, really what he's saying is that the Greeks worship wisdom. And the Greeks pray to wisdom. Greeks look to wisdom for their provision. And the word wisdom, this is my definition of it, but I didn't pull it out of a hat. Wisdom is and you got to look at Greek history to know why Greeks worshipped wisdom. Their history was that, you know, while the rest of our ancestors were swinging through trees, you know, jumping on wild animals, ripping their throats out with our teeth and eating them raw, the Greeks were developing a system of logic and reasoning that was the foundation for all of Western civilization. They said wisdom works. Wisdom works. You can count on wisdom. In fact, wisdom is to be elevated up to the point where it is, in fact, to be worshiped, to be relied on. In fact, that is what God is wisdom. And wisdom is the advancement of civilization by the means of reason. We use the word up here in the North Country, the word reason simply means good sense. Good sense. He's a level-headed guy. He drools out of both sides of his mouth. Okay, but that's just the definition of wisdom, is that wisdom is an advancement of what is considered civilized. And by the way, we're very Greek. We've been influenced very much in America by Greeks and not so much by Jews. Not so much by Jews. Okay, if you don't think that we are influenced by the Greeks and their idea of logic, reason, and civilization, I invite you to go to a people group, go to a land that was not influenced by the Greeks and see the difference. Oh, is there a difference? I have gotten off the plane after being away in other countries, and I have, yeah. You think you mock this? I have done it myself. I have gotten off that plane and I've got down on my knees and I've kissed the ground of America. Anybody else done that? They had tours of duty or off in some, and I actually did that because, there's a difference between Greek and everybody else. There is a difference in that, and they're very proud of this. Very proud of this because it works for them. But what kind of wisdom does the Scriptures? I found this in Acts 17, 18, and 21 is a juxtaposition of this. Is that it says that in Acts 17, 18, Paul is in the center of Greekness. He's in Athens. He's in Athens, and guess who he bumps into there? He bumps into what the Scriptures call philosophers. Philosophers. And they invite him to come and explain this weird new idea. And in verse 21, it gives us more information about what this foundation of Greek civilization is made out of. It says, "For they do nothing but talk about the most current new thing." They do nothing but talk about the current new thing. That is so Greek, but boy, does that sound familiar? They do nothing but talk about the most current new thing. See, the thing about new things is that they become stale very quickly. And then there's a craving for something newer. Does that sound like America? What's that? Yeah, that's right. You got to be woke. You got to be woke. And if you don't know what that means, you ain't woke. All right. So what we've got here is we've got a culture that's foundations and the result of their talking about the latest new thing, back and forth, has produced a civilization that they are very proud of. It works. It goes on in that verse, in verse 21 there, to say that there was two kinds of philosophers that are being specifically encountered by Paul. These are the two wings of the Greek airplane. Okay, the two wheels on the Greek bicycle and all that. Is that the first is called the Epicureans. If we want to find out what we're talking about when we talk about wisdom, this is what Greeks worship. They worship the philosophies of the Epicureans. They believe, present eloquently. Hey, these people that produce the Greek language, it is the finest. So they know how to talk. And they know how to explain, and they explain in great detail why life consists of pursuing happiness by means of pleasure. I mean, we've never heard of anything like that, but and so that's the Epicureans. Okay? And then there was the other group that's kind of like the other wheel on this thing, is that they're called the Stoics. And the Stoics believe that life consisted of control by means of logic. You control by means of logic and sound reasoning. So we have those that are in the pursuit of happiness, and we have those that are in pursuit of control. And they mix themselves together, and you have Greek philosophy. That's what wisdom is when Paul says the world's wisdom does not know God. But the thing about it is that when you get Christians that are still infected by the world philosophy, you end up with Christians that believe that you can know God through the pursuit of happiness and through controlling others and the environment and everything through solid, airtight reasoning. And you'll find that in our church today, is that there's the gospel according to have your best life now, all the way over to those that I tend to have scratch my itch, and I need to be careful of this, is that those, on the other hand, that present a theology, a study of God that is based on airtight logic and reasoning that goes from one point to the next point to the next point to the next point. As one of the prophets said, these are the kind that do line upon line. You know, here a little, there a little, they put it together. So that's what we're talking about with the Greeks. Greeks worship these things. Jews worship God's move in the past. Now, I'm not saying, guys, please don't. I'm not saying anything about the Jewish people. And Paul isn't saying anything about the Greeks or the Jews. He's saying that there is a attitude that can, a worldly attitude that can infect the Christian that leans toward a worship of the power of God. And everything is gauged toward, there's only one answer, and that's for God to show His power. And then there's this other predisposition that says there's only one answer, and that answer is to get things logically reasoned out so that they absolutely have no excuse to deny it. And these are two things, and Paul says neither one of them is God's wisdom. Neither one of them is God's wisdom. Just read this through. Greeks have a predetermined conclusion about how God operates in order to make sense of Him. Because Greeks are all about, it's got to make sense or I reject it. He must explain Himself. Who is He? God must explain Himself, and they will judge whether He fits with what they have already decided He is. Okay. Oh, man. Now, Jews have a predetermined conclusion about how God operates in order for them to decide if it is really God or not. It's a predetermined conclusion. He must prove Himself by acting in the same ways He acted in their past And they will decide whether current acts of God fit with what they have already decided God does. That's a mouthful, and it may have gone right over your head. But it has to do with this thing that says, if it's not like it was in my glory days, and the Greeks are saying, I dare you to try to convince me. I dare you. I double dog dare you to persuade me. And then Paul comes along and he says, but, let's see what time I got here. But, however, we've got these two salesmen selling these ideas of wisdom and what it really is. And we're not talking about wisdom in the world. We're talking about worldly wisdom residing within a Christian. Okay? But we preach Christ crucified. Whoa, another whiplash. We're talking about Jews and Greeks and predispositions and philosophies and what they think is important and what they don't think is important. And all of a sudden, he comes up with this. I get curious when I go, man, are you sure that those two things didn't get mixed up by the scribes? And yet here we have it. But we preach Christ crucified. Let's take a look at this thing that is neither one of the two wisdoms that we've talked about. It's neither one. It's just so other than the other two. It's just other than. Okay, Christ crucified. After 2,100 years of hearing the term Christ crucified, we have a callus this big on our minds and hearts. We don't know what Christ crucified means any longer. Let me just break it down a little bit for you here. Christ, what does the word Christ mean? It means the Messiah. Christ means the Messiah. It's the Greek word for Messiah. So we got Hebrew that says Messiah, Greeks that say Christ. It's the same word. Now, when you think about Messiah, what do you think of? You think of power. You think of rulership, victory, dominion, life. That's Messiah. We've seen examples of or types of Messiah in the past, and that's who we're expecting to come again. So we have Messiah being somebody that's way up here. And then we have the word crucified. Christ crucified. How they jam these two words together is phenomenal. Or what Paul did, is that crucified, you know what it is, but it was, at the time that Paul wrote this, it was designated execution for slaves and some political malcontents. Teach them a lesson, keep them in their place. And won't ever try that again. It represents weakness. It represents defeat. It represents humiliation. And it represents death. So how can you have Messiah crucified in the same sentence? This is what both the Jews and the Greeks hate. Is a crucified Messiah. They can't accept that in any way, shape, or form. Let's take a look at it. Because Christ crucified is a contradiction in terms. We've heard the word, because it got popular in the movies, oxymoron. Oxymoron means two words that are exclusive of each other, and you put them together. And you put those two words together, and you come up with an entirely different meaning. First one, let's take a look at this. The two reactions to Christ crucified. Unto the Jews, a stumbling block. Unto the Greeks, foolishness. Let's take Jews first. Stumbling block. Christ crucified, the whole idea of a crucified Messiah to the Jews was a scandal. The word stumbling block there is skandalon. And that's where we get our word scandal. Well, then I had to look up scandal. I mean, we got tons of scandals going on right now. But do we actually know what it is? A scandal is this. It is anything that offends and shocks the moral feelings to the point of arousing outrage. Sound like Christians today? Okay. This idea of a crucified Messiah was an outrage to the Jewish kind of mind that says that Christianity and God is all about being on top. God, my following of God is all about me and God Himself being on top all the time. Okay? And they cannot reconcile the idea of one who's supposed to be on top getting crucified in weakness and humiliation. And they will react. Next part, a Messiah, here it is. This is the way the Jew thinks. Not the Jewish people, but the mentality that you can find all around the world amongst Christians. Is that I cannot accept the idea of a Messiah so weak that he gets himself crucified by his enemies. And it's an outrage that I will violently reject. That is where wisdom of the world will take you. Here's the other place that the wisdom of the world will take you. Now, Greeks, it says, to the Greeks, crucified Messiah is foolishness. Foolishness. I looked up foolishness. I was amazed to find. You should do this. You get amazed too. I was amazed to find something so penetrating in a dictionary. Foolishness means the mocking of a person's mind. The mocking of a person's mind. If you say, you're a fool, really what you're doing is that you are casting aspersions on their mind. Okay? They're either mad. Paul had, he had someone tell him that the guy was mocking Paul's mind. It says, you flipped out, you wigged out. Your mind is not working properly. Craziness, stupid, out of touch. I tell you, especially amongst our young, you might mock a young person's haircut. You might mock the car they drive. You might mock the phone they use. You'll be all right. Yeah, they'll see that, But if you mock them by saying, you are out of touch, you ain't woke, you have caused something to happen that they fear more than anything. I know, I was that way too. Is that to be in the place where I wasn't, we called it being with it. Okay? And if you weren't with it, you were worthy of being mocked. You were worthy of being mocked. And there was nothing that I feared more than being mocked. And let me ask you this. Hebrews has got an interesting spot. Hebrews 11:36. It gives a list of all the bad things that can happen to a Christian if they remain faithful. Oh, there's stonings, there's imprisonment, there's scourgings, there's being sawed in two, all these things. But guess what heads the list? Guess what heads the list there? It's they endured cruel mockings. Okay? Let me ask you this. You have an opportunity to stand up for Christ, to speak up for Christ. Tell them about a crucified Messiah. Do you keep quiet because you're afraid you'll be sawed in half? Do you keep quiet because they will stone you? Or do you keep quiet? Shh, let's just keep our heads down. Because we're afraid of cruel mockings. This is real bullets, you guys. This is real bullets. And we know that we have the cruel mockings that have been ramped up another notch because of social media. People would rather die, and do die, because of cruel mockings. So when the Greeks, who are so refined and so logical and so together, encounter a crucified Christ, their response is to mock your mind. To mock your mind. That's what foolishness is. When they say, that's foolishness, they're saying, you're not with it and your mind is not working properly. Okay, and here's what mocking means. And this is what Christ crucified means to them. Anything that offends and shocks the intellectual reasonings to the point of arousing mockery. Remember what it was for the Jews? It was anything that offends and shocks the moral feelings. Oh boy, it's the feelings that make that are big for the Jew type of person. And for the Greek type of person, it's the reasonings that get offended and shocked to the point of arousing mockery. And here's what they say, and here's what they're thinking. A God so stupid that he gets himself crucified by his enemies is a joke that they will viciously ridicule. Do those things sound like maybe they're not just in the past, that they're actually things that we're dealing with now, that the book of 1 Corinthians is actually really, really important for us today? Because actually, as I've said, you can think about this, is that we are Corinth. We are Corinth in many, many aspects along the way. So when we're talking about wisdom, I haven't even gotten to God's alternative. See, we have two choices to go this power disposition or to this logic disposition in our approach to God. But there's a third option. And I can't do it today because it would take too long. And I'm sorry, because of the way things are, is that I cannot reach and tie everything up in a neat bow, because these things are more detailed than just a sermonette. So you'll have to hang on to what you've got here now, because there's more to come about that third alternative. What does God consider wisdom?